They said the alloy was unbreakable. They lied. When that black sedan accelerated, aiming straight for the girl, the only thing standing between her and a closed casket was a rusted hinge I'd pulled from a decommissioned tank turret 30 years ago. Most men would have panicked. I didn't have time for panic. I just watched the weld lines. But what happened next didn't just break the laws of physics, it broke the spirit of every man watching. And the real story isn't about the speed. It's about what happens when you push a man who just wants to be left alone. The silence in the workshop was heavy. The kind of silence you only earn after 50 years of noise. It smelled of sulfur, old iron, and the sharp acidic tang of industrial solvent. Dust motes danced in the shafts of afternoon sunlight cutting through the high windows, settling on the concrete floor like snow on a battlefield. To the untrained eye, the shop was a chaotic jumble of metal and grease. To Ronin, it was an ordered universe. Every tool had a place, and every place had a history. Ronin sat on a wooden stool that had been polished smooth by the seat of his pants over 3 decades. In his hands, he held a camshaft from a '69 big block, inspecting the lobes with the intensity of a diamond cutter. He didn't use a digital micrometer. He didn't trust batteries. He used a Starrett vernier caliper, cold steel against his skin, reading the measurements by the tick marks that never lied. The radio in the corner hummed low, tuning into a classic station that played music from a time when singers actually sang and drummers actually hit things. He heard the footsteps long before the shadow fell across the bay door. He didn't look up, he knew the cadence. Uneven dragging, the rhythmic scuff-step scuff of someone fighting a losing battle with gravity. "It broke again," the voice said. It was Sarah, 16 years old, but her eyes held the 1,000-yard stare of a veteran who had seen too much trench warfare. Ronin put the camshaft down on a rag deliberately, aligning it with the edge of the bench. He wiped his hands on his overalls, taking his time to remove every trace of oil before he turned. She stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the harsh white light of the modern world outside. She was leaning heavily on a crutch, her left pant leg pinned up. In her right hand, she dangled a piece of white plastic and carbon fiber. It looked like something you'd find in the toy aisle of a department store. It was sleek, branded with logos, and completely snapped in half at the knee joint. "Bring it here," Ronin said. His voice sounded like gravel grinding in a cement mixer. Low, flat. No pity. Pity was a luxury for people who didn't have work to do. Sarah hobbled to the workbench and placed the unit on the steel surface. It clattered, a hollow, cheap sound. Ronin picked it up. He didn't look at the girl, he looked at the failure. He twisted the joint. The polymer housing flexed. "Stress fatigue," Sarah said, repeating the excuse she'd been fed. "The corporate rep said I walked on it too hard. Said it's rated for moderate urban mobility, not living," Ronin finished for her. He tossed the leg onto the bench. It bounced. Garbage. Injection molded lie. They build it to fail in 18 months so they can sell you the upgrade for 6,000 credits. "My dad doesn't have 6,000 credits," Sarah said quietly. "He doesn't even have 600. Ronin looked at her then. He saw the set of her jaw. She wasn't crying, she was angry. Good tears rust the soul. Anger is fuel. If you channel it, it burns clean. "Sit," he commanded, pointing to a crate of engine blocks. Ronin turned his back on her and walked into the depths of the shop. He moved past the racks of tires, past the half-assembled transmission of a farm truck, past the lathe that was the size of a small car. He walked to the back wall where a heavy steel locker stood bolted to the concrete. It was secured with a padlock that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. Ronin fished a brass key from his pocket. No keypads, no biometrics. Brass and tumblers, he opened the door. The smell of cosmoline and gun oil wafted out. A scent that triggered memories of rain, mud, and the sound of artillery walking up a ridgeline. Inside were parts that didn't exist in any catalog. Scavenged pieces from a life spent fixing things in places where the nearest supply depot was 1,000 miles away. He reached to the bottom shelf and pulled out a heavy wooden box. He carried it back to the workbench and set it down. Thud. The sound was solid, dense. He pried the lid open. Inside, resting on a bed of oil-soaked rags, was a hunk of dark pitted metal. It was a hinge assembly, ugly rough. The paint had long since burned off, leaving a patina of blackened steel. "What is that?" Sarah asked. "Tank turret pivot," Ronin said. "M88 Recovery Vehicle, 72. We took a direct hit from a mortar. The tracks blew off, the armor cracked. This hinge didn't even scratch. He picked it up. It weighed 4 pounds. It was designed to rotate a 60-ton load while taking fire. It doesn't know about moderate urban mobility. It only knows about holding the line. He looked at the flimsy plastic socket of her broken leg. I can't fix the plastic, Sarah. You can't weld a lie, but if you trust me, I can build you an ugly leg that will outlive us both. Sarah looked at the rusted chunk of iron. Then she looked at Ronin's hands that were scarred, stained, and steady as bedrock. Do it, she said. The fabrication took 3 days. Ronin locked the shop doors. He turned off the radio. He didn't answer the phone. He worked with the single-minded focus of a monk illuminating a manuscript. Only his religion was metallurgy, and his prayers were spoken in the hiss of an arc welder. He stripped the plastic leg down to the socket liner, the only part that actually fit her body. The rest went into the trash. He mounted the tank hinge in the heavy vise. He fired up the milling machine. The cutter screamed as it bit into the hardened military steel, peeling off blue curls of metal that smoked on the floor. This wasn't mild steel from the hardware store. This was cold-rolled, heat-treated ordnance steel. It fought the tools. Ronin fought back. He fabricated the shin bone from the drive shaft of a 1-ton diesel truck. He welded the connection points using a rod that burned hot and deep, watching the puddle of molten metal fuse the disparate parts into a single, unbreakable whole. He didn't use blueprints. The geometry was in his head, calibrated by decades of watching how machines moved and how they broke. He installed a hydraulic recoil buffer from an aircraft landing gear into the knee mechanism. The tank hinge was free-swinging, which was no good for walking. It needed resistance. It needed to store energy. He tuned the valving by feel, compressing the piston with his own body weight until the resistance felt like a human muscle contracting. On the third night, he quenched the final welds in a bucket of oil. The shop filled with thick white smoke. He pulled the leg out, dripping and black. He didn't paint it. He took a wire wheel to it, buffing the steel down to a dull gunmetal gray. It looked prehistoric. It looked like something dug up from the skeleton of a giant. When Sarah arrived the next morning, Ronin was sitting on his stool, drinking black coffee from a chipped mug. The leg stood on the workbench, upright, balanced on its own weight. It looks mean, Sarah said. It is, Ronin replied. Put it on. She strapped into the harness. The weight was immediate. It dragged at her hip. She frowned. It's too heavy, Ronin. I can't lift this. Don't lift it, Ronin barked. He stood up and walked over to her. You've been walking on eggshells. You've been trying to float. That plastic toy taught you to be weak. Gravity isn't your enemy, Sarah. Gravity is a battery. You have to charge it. He kicked the steel toe of the prosthetic. It rang like a church bell. Slam it, he ordered. Don't step. Drive your heel into the concrete like you're trying to crack the floor. The hydraulic accumulator I installed, it eats impact. The harder you hit, the more pressure it builds. When you roll to your toe, it releases. It doesn't just hold you up. It throws you forward. Sarah hesitated. She looked down at the Frankenstein creation strapped to her limb. Trust the steel, Ronin said softly. She took a breath. She lifted her knee and stomped down. Clang, the sound was jarring, but as her weight settled, the knee joint didn't buckle. It compressed smoothly, a hiss of high-pressure fluid damping the shock. Then, as she shifted her weight forward, the piston expanded. It kicked. Her leg snapped forward, dragging her body with it. She stumbled, catching herself. Whoa, she whispered. Again, Ronin said. Harder. She took another step. Clang, hiss, thud, then another. Clang, hiss, thud. She wasn't limping. She was marching. The rhythm was industrial. It was the sound of a pile driver. Run, Ronin said. And here, run. She turned to the open bay of the shop. She pushed off. The first step was heavy. The second was lighter. By the third step, the hydraulics were cycling at optimal pressure. She wasn't lifting the leg was propelling her. She bounded across the concrete, covering the 30 feet to the door in 3 strides. She stopped, skidding on her good foot, breathless. It wants to go, she said, looking back at him. It feels like it has a pulse. It has torque, Ronin corrected. Torque is better than a pulse. A pulse stops, torque just waits. Before she could celebrate, the sound of gravel crunching outside cut through the air. It wasn't a customer. Ronin knew the sound of customer cars, hesitant, rattling, broken. This was the aggressive, tight suspension of a government-issue SUV. Or worse, corporate enforcement. Ronin walked to the window. A black sedan with tinted windows had pulled up, flanked by a tow truck. 3 men were getting out. They wore suits that were too shiny and shoes that were too clean. One held a tablet, repo, Ronin said. He spat on the floor. They tracked the serial number of the socket liner. Technically, that plastic cup still belongs to the medical corporation. They'll take it, Sarah said, panic rising in her voice. If they see what you did, they'll say you voided the warranty. They'll confiscate it for safety violations. They did it to Mr. Henderson last month. Ronin turned to her. His face was a mask of calm. They aren't taking anything. Go out the back. Head for the tree line. I can't run in the dirt with this, it's too heavy. You aren't running on dirt, Ronin said, grabbing a heavy wrench from the bench. You're running on engineering.go. Sarah bolted for the rear door. Ronin walked out the front bay, stepping into the sunlight to meet the wolves. The lead suit was a man named Sterling. He had the soft, doughy face of a man whose toughest battle was finding a parking spot. He sneered at the grease on Ronin's overalls. Mr. Ronin, Sterling said, tapping his tablet. We have a read on a proprietary medical asset at this location. A socket liner registered to Sarah Miller. Our data shows unauthorized tampering. The warranty agreement clearly states, "Get off my land," Ronin said. He didn't shout, he didn't point. He just stood there, the wrench hanging loosely by his side. It was a 24-inch pipe wrench, iron heavy. Sterling blinked. He wasn't used to being interrupted. Excuse me, we have a recovery order. If you've modified our intellectual property, that is a federal crime. We are seizing the unit. He signaled to the two men behind him. They were big, private security contractors. Beefy necks, dead eyes, tactical belts. They started toward the shop. She's not in there, Ronin said. We saw the signal move, Sterling said. She's running, get her! The two guards sprinted around the side of the building. Sterling smirked at Ronin. You're in a lot of trouble, old man. Helping a defaulter? Destroying corporate property? I'm going to bury you in lawsuits. Ronin took a cigarette from his pocket and lit it with a Zippo. Click snap. He took a drag and blew the smoke toward Sterling. You boys ever hunt wild boar? Ronin asked conversationally. What? Boar looks slow, Ronin said. Heavy, ugly. But when it decides to move, it goes through brush like a bulldozer. You sent 2 showroom poodles to catch a wild boar. From behind the shop, shouting erupted. Then the sound of an engine roaring to life. The black sedan driver slammed the car into gear and peeled out, tearing across the grass around the building. Ronin walked calmly around the corner to watch. Sarah was in the middle of the field behind the shop. The ground was rough, hard-packed clay, gopher holes, and tall, dry weeds. It was ankle-breaking terrain. The two guards were chasing her on foot, but they were stumbling. Their tactical boots were heavy and the ground was uneven. But Sarah was flying. Every time that steel leg hit the earth, it dug in. A plastic leg would have slipped. The steel cleats Ronin had welded to the sole bit into the clay like tank tracks. Thud, thud, thud. She was moving with a loping, terrifying gait, eating up distance in 6-foot bounds. The hydraulic hiss of the knee joint was audible even from 50 yards away. Get the car, cut her off. Sterling screamed into his radio. The black sedan roared past the guards, bouncing violently over the ruts. It was a modern interceptor, all-wheel drive, 400 horsepower. It gained on her fast. Sarah looked back. She saw the grille of the car bearing down. She was 100 yards from the woods. The car was faster. Ronin watched. He didn't flinch. He didn't yell advice. Advice is for training. This was combat. You either trust your equipment or you fail. The car pulled alongside her, the driver trying to herd her away from the trees. He swerved the fender inches from her hip. He thought she would shy away. He thought she would panic and fall. He didn't know about the tank hinge. Sarah didn't veer. She saw the deep drainage ditch approaching fast, a 12-foot gap of mud and stagnant water that separated the field from the forest. The car couldn't cross it. The driver slammed on the brakes, the tires locking up, sliding on the dry grass. Sarah didn't brake. She planted her left foot at the very edge of the ditch. She swung the steel leg forward. She slammed it into the lip of the embankment with everything she had. The tank hinge compressed. The aircraft hydraulic buffer bottomed out, storing the kinetic energy of her sprint, her weight, and her fear. For a microsecond, she was motionless, coiled like a spring. Then the physics took over. The valve released. It was violent. The leg extended with enough force to kick up a spray of dirt clods behind her. Sarah launched into the air. She didn't just jump, she was fired. She soared over the 12-foot gap, her body flat, her arms reaching for the far bank. The sedan slid. The driver had miscalculated the friction coefficient of dry grass. The heavy car skidded sideways, tires churning uselessly. It hit the edge of the ditch. The nose dipped. Crunch. The car slammed into the opposite bank. The front bumper crumpling, the radiator exploding in a cloud of white steam. It hung there, suspended over the mud, wheels spinning in the air. Sarah landed on the far side. She rolled, a clumsy, tumbling roll, and came up on her feet. She stood there for a moment, chest heaving, looking back at the smoking wreckage. The steel leg was covered in mud, but it stood straight, unbent, unbroken. She looked across the field at Ronin. Ronin raised his hand, a single slow nod. Then he turned back to Sterling. Sterling was pale. His mouth was opening and closing like a landed fish. He looked at the wrecked company car, then at the girl who had just outrun a V8 engine, and finally at the old mechanic standing calmly in a cloud of cigarette smoke. That's impossible, Sterling stammered. The human body cannot generate that kind of thrust. The structural integrity of the femur would snap. That device, what did you put in there? Ronin dropped his cigarette and crushed it out with the heel of his boot. He stepped closer to Sterling. The suit shrank back, suddenly realizing that he was alone miles from the city, with a man who built monsters in his spare time. I didn't put anything in there but steel and geometry, Ronin said. You boys are so used to building things that are smart, chips, sensors, Wi-Fi, that you forgot about things that are strong. He poked Sterling in the chest with a finger that felt like a marlin spike. That hinge held a turret on a tank while taking RPG fire in the mud. You think a sedan is going to stop it? You think a warranty is going to stop it? We'll sue, Sterling squeaked, but the threat was empty. He was looking at Ronin's eyes, and he saw something there that scared him more than the lawsuit. He saw the absolute unwavering certainty of a man who knows exactly what he is. You can try, Ronin said. But first you're going to get your junk out of my ditch. And then you're going to explain to your bosses how a 16-year-old girl in a box of scraps humiliated a $100,000 interceptor. Ronin walked over to the tow truck driver, who was staring in open-mouthed awe. You, Ronin said, hook up the sedan. Drag it out. Try not to tear the axle off, though I doubt it matters now. He walked back into the shop without looking back. Sarah came back an hour later. She had circled through the woods, coming in the back way. She was dirty. Her jeans were torn and she had a scrape on her cheek, but she was walking tall. She entered the shop. Ronin was back at the lathe, turning a new pin for a tractor. The rhythm of the shop had returned, the incident already filed away under nuisance. She walked up to him. The steel leg clanked softly on the concrete. Clink, clink. It was a sound of substance. Ronin, she said. He stopped the lathe. He didn't turn around. I cleared the ditch, she said, 12 feet. I cleared it. I saw, he said. It felt... She struggled for the word. It felt like I was a machine. Like I was unbreakable. Ronin turned then. He wiped his hands on his rag. He looked at the leg. Scratched, muddy, ugly as sin, and absolutely perfect. You aren't a machine, Sarah, he said quietly. Machines break. Machines have parts lists. You have will. The steel just gives your will something to push against. He walked over to the coffee pot and poured a cup. He held it out to her. Drink, the adrenaline dump is coming. You'll get the shakes in about 5 minutes. She took the cup. Her hands were trembling slightly. What do we do now, they know? They know nothing, Ronin said. They know they lost men like that. They fear what they can't measure. They can't measure that leg. They can't measure you, they won't come back. He picked up his calipers again. Besides, he added, a ghost of a smile touching the corner of his mouth. The first smile she had seen on him in years. I have a few more hinges in the locker. If they bring a bigger car, we'll build a bigger leg. Sarah looked down at the rusted, welded, magnificent piece of iron attached to her body. She realized then that she hadn't just been given a prosthetic. She had been given an inheritance. She had been given the philosophy of the old world, that if you build it right, if you build it strong, and if you stand your ground, nothing, not time, not rust, and certainly not a suit in a black car, can break you. In a world that is constantly trying to sell you the next disposable thing, there is a quiet revolution in simply refusing to break. There is power in the rust. There is victory in the weld. And if you're the kind of person who knows the difference between a tool and a toy, then you know exactly which side of the ditch you want to be on. We don't ask for permission to exist. We just forge the steel, hold the line, and let them try to move us.